So this video, it's going to be about my personal opinions on good and evil and the propagation of such. So one of my favorite Shakespeare quotes is, I'm going to mess it up, but nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And I think in a very real sense, that is what good and evil is as far as we see it in our day-to-day lives. I think you could get philosophical on it, and I could go on a tangent about that, but basically a good metaphor is good is sustaining and building something of value, increasing the beauty and organization of something, fulfilling an end, and evil is essentially the destruction of such, and it's an impetus to reach what you would think of as like a metaphysical abyss. Maybe that's kind of like a poetic way of saying what it is in a more concrete sense, but that's what I'm going with. So I think the way evil propagates itself, a lot of it has to do with, from like the human standpoint, a lot of it has to do with our need for survival. I think in a basic sense, how it came about with us, it was just survival. I think a good example would be, you have like a tribe of cavemen, they're starving to death, they raid the other tribe, they kill people, they take their stuff. So a lot of it comes from basic survival, and since we live in a complex world, that's kind of transformed itself into more of like a psychological survival. We were raised a certain way, we have certain values, and a lot of those are maladaptive, whether or not we're conscious of it or not. And that translates itself into an impetus for evil deeds. You think a lot of it, like we have a human hierarchy, so people want to climb the ladder, and the funny thing is, it's like in their own minds, because most people don't even really care, but you have certain psychological needs, and you're willing to cut corners, and because of that deception of, well, essentially you want to present yourself as good or valuable, and what you end up doing is you lie, and that lie comes to light one way or the other, and a lot of times that lie comes out through destruction. And a lot of times it's in an egoic sense, and you could build it up to, you could extrapolate it out into like a sociological perspective, going back to like survival, it's psychological survival. So like if you were to extrapolate it out just off the top of my head, like an example, like you think of World War II, like how did World War II get started? There was an economic depression, there was a scarcity caused by a lie, because you had an over leverage of the money supply caused a depression. Came to light that there wasn't as much, I don't know, stuff or value than what we thought. So like the caveman example, we go to the tribe, steal their crap, so there's not enough value, so there's a scarcity that really fundamentally never changed, but like it came to light through the Great Depression. And then from an egoic standpoint, you had nationalism. So there's a lot of false pride on a national level, rises up through individuals to the societal level. So you had a lot of national pride. So because of perceived scarcity economically, and from people's false pride for like national identities, that got the political wheels turning. And so you had, like Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, fascist Italy, they set the world on fire. You had half a decade the world was set on fire just because of something that was illusory to begin with. You could have had tens of millions of lives saved. Going back to lies, look at communism. The death toll from that's arguably over 100 million people. And again, it's a lie. You have an ideal that doesn't line up with reality. And what you get from that is a lie. The foundation is weak. So then you get all sorts of manipulations to sustain the lie. You get government programs that are more interested in propping up the lie than it is for the actual survival of people. And the snake eats its own tail, and you have death as the result. So going more about evil, the funny thing about evil is, like I kind of alluded to, a lot of it is perpetuated off of ignorance. Psychological survival, that's kind of an illusion, because really you just need to survive. And what do you need? You need food, water, shelter. You need your body in homeostasis. There is a psychological opponent because we're humans and we're social, so you have to get along with other people. But that gets completely out of whack. What do you need? You need to be agreeable. You need to work with other people. Other than that, you get you can get, you get these false ways for like how we socialize and interact with other people. So yeah, it's like ignorance. And another thing about evil is it's self-deceptive. So a lot of times, like, evil is perpetuated without us ever knowing. Which this will be something I'll get to in a little bit, but it's about where does good and evil come from. If you think about it, well, I'll get to that later, but a lot of times it comes from, it's kind of spooky, but it comes from beyond ourselves, but I'll get to that later. So anyways, like, evil being self-covering, I think of a lot of things like evil's perpetuated without us ever knowing it. Just recently we had the shooting in Minneapolis by an ICE officer from a woman that tried to hit him with her car. And you think of like how ridiculous that is. The guy that did it, he was obviously in the wrong. He shouldn't have shot her. The woman was in the wrong. She shouldn't have tried to run him over. She shouldn't have, been taking the moral high ground by, instead of like getting her own house in order by taking up some cause. Shouldn't have had the Trump administration, just taking like a firm stand and, doing political theater, just trying to say, hey, we're the new sheriff in town, we're cleaning house. You shouldn't be portraying that type of image. So it's kind of funny, like, both sides are ostensibly trying to do good because, well, we're trying to like do something about illegal immigrants and we're trying to make our country safer. but still, the woman got shot. You still have riots. And on the other side, you have the protesters, like, well, they think they're doing good, but obviously someone is in the wrong because you have riots and you have not a very good situation. So both sides are thinking they're in the right, but you actually get evil as a result. I just visited Gettysburg a couple hours ago, and I think of the Civil War. Obviously, slavery was wrong, racism is wrong, but then you had people that were just pushing for the ending of slavery at any cost. And there was political pressure as a result of this, and we ended up getting into a civil war. Over 500,000 people died of that.
There are police reported ahead.
Oh, shouldn't be on my cell phone. There's police up ahead. But anyways, maybe I'm committing evil right now. But anyways, you think about it, like, I'm sure rational minds at the time, they would have realized, hey, technology is going to remove the necessity for slavery, so you're not going to have that. The whole world thought we were ass backwards for having slavery. It was becoming a thing in, I guess you'd call them first world or developed countries at the time, even though that wasn't really the parlance for describing, countries back then. But anyways, the rest of the developed world, they thought it was nonsense. And I think Brazil was the last major economy that abolished slavery, and they did that before you had the turning into the 19th century. So slavery would have gone away on its own, and if we would have just accepted that fact, something that we already knew was evil, it would have gone away. Philosopher once said, a lot of problems can be solved by doing nothing. And that's very true. You still would have had racism in this country. You still would have had a lot of the BS, antebellum Southern culture, but the problem would have gone away on its own. So people that thought they were doing good, they were actually part of the problem. The people that we historically think as being part of the problem, antebellum South, plantations, slavery, they were obviously in the wrong too. We all learned that in school. We all agree on that. But there's two sides of it. So ignorance and stupidity, that causes a lot of problems too. So evil is self-covering. We don't really realize the consequences of our actions. And this is how evil perpetuates itself. And the crazy thing is, getting back to the point I made earlier about, well, so where do good and evil come from? And it is a little spooky, but it comes from, in a way, you could think of it, it does come from powers outside of what you normally think of as how normal human cognition works. So a lot of good and evil, it's like evil, I said, it's like psychological survival. For whatever reason, in your head, you have to think you're the best, you're on top, you have power over everyone. You feel like you have that need. And if you take that to an extreme end, you will co-opt forces beyond what you normally see, and you'll have evil forces working for you to achieve that end. And the ramifications keep going. It needs to perpetuate itself. You'll do evil to other people. People will believe that lie. They themselves will have that evil force inside of them, which in itself is illusory, it's egoic, it's a lie, and they will continue that on. And the same is true for good. Like the examples of the rioting in Minneapolis with ICE and the Civil War, World War II. A lot of good. So how do those problems happen? You can't think your way out of a solution because
There are police reported ahead.
Well, there I go sinning again. But, so where was I going with that? So yeah, a lot of the good, you think about it, you can't think your way into good action a lot of times, because what are you going to do? You're going to pick a side. You're going to think slavery is bad and fight against it. You're going to be one of the people that are ostensibly bad and perpetuate slavery, even though you obviously know it's wrong. Even those people tried to deceive themselves, they made justifications. Well, slavery has a historical context, saying Africans are an inferior race. It's do or die. We need this for our lifestyle. We need this to survive. People made all sorts of justifications, and some of them are so shallow they're kind of laughable, with slavery, but, you also get it on the other side, too.
There are police reported ahead.
But anyway, so how do you become good? You have to go beyond your scheming and thinking what's good. You'll do that anyways. It's human nature. You can't turn your thinking brain off, so you'll always have your modus operandi for how you're going about life and how to be good. And ironically, there are very few people that actively try to conjure evil forces, but evil still perpetuates itself. And a lot of that is through your own machinations, your own thinking, your own manipulation. So getting a little sidetracked, but anyways, so for good, you kind of have to go beyond your own modus operandi, your own thinking, your own scheming, and it's, again, spooky forces. You have to go beyond your own human brain, your own human thinking, and it's a lot of you get into spirituality, religion, faith. Love is kind of a tacky word, but kind of a universal consciousness, a universal love. You have to have that penetrate you and go through you to just be a source for construction, for something good. So for good and evil, and it's crazy because, it's not a cut or dry thing, and we're always having these forces within us, but we don't realize it, but these forces move through us. And you could get into a whole philosophical argument on free will, but who is the master of your own sovereign? These are interesting and good questions to have, but you still have to pick a side, and you have to be a master to something. Not a master to something, but your master has to be something other than yourself. Even if you go on your own conditioning or your own thinking, there will still be something deeper and more powerful guiding you, whether that's for good or evil. So that's just some of my thoughts. I'm just freewheeling. I'm driving right now, so my thoughts aren't as coalesced as they probably should be. I might be making another video on this, where it's probably more linear and easier to follow. But just thought I'd give some of my brief thoughts on like good and evil and how they come about. All right, thank you. All right, have a good day. Bye.